to vote against renewal of a treaty the U.S. basis, focus on the administration. It's impeached the sitting president, and it's also fought a dictatorship before it was abolished. So that was one of the key hallmarks. What would you do in your position, especially when it called for critical collaboration or fiscalizing on the other end with the current administration? What would you do differently? What would you fiscalize? What would you support on your first few weeks of office? Anyone, Titi.
Can women first? For me as a woman, I'm very keen on budget oversight because I feel that much of the money that is spent for conflict in Mindanao could have been spent more for basic social services. And I felt that the 2 billion pesos that was spent for Marawi War could have been spent a lot on needed funds for health and sanitation and elsewhere, as you'd said, you need disaster management and all that. So for me, budget oversight, senators should call out when budgets are spent for war, conflict, when our constitution says we should put primacy on peace.
Attorney Roque.
Well, I have supported the president and I continue to do so, but I have served in Congress and I have used the power of the purse to promote what are ideals which are close to my heart, including human rights. Every cabinet member was actually relieved when I joined the cabinet because that meant they would be spared from my questioning. No? But I think the power of the purse should be used to police the government. No? But as far as independence is concerned, I think I've proven through my action that while I support the president, I can be independent. Proof is he did not want me to run. He wanted me to stay in the cabinet as his spokesperson. But I said, thank you, but I have an unfinished legislative agenda. I'm running. I think that proves my independence.
Well, I would oppose any legislation that's anti-poor or anti-human rights, the death penalty, the attempts to lower the age of criminal responsibility. At the same time, I would focus on strengthening our justice system. One proposal that I have is for us to remove from the courts jurisdiction over business and commercial disputes and pass it to an arbitration type of litigation. We've done that successfully in the construction industry. We can expand that law because for two reasons. Number one, it will remove and declog our courts, crowded with too many cases, and it will prove less of a temptation for our judges as far as corruption is concerned. When you have two contending parties that are both financially, let's say, able, it makes it more susceptible to under-the-table kind of deals. If we can do that, I think we could hit two birds with one stone, make justice faster, and at the same time remove the temptations for corruption. These would be among the measures I would push for.
Well, the question, Quintin's question is a reality for me right now. And if you look at the past 2 years, the line in the sand is drawn when it comes to laws which are anti-poor. Pag meron hong batas na makakatulong sa mga kababayan natin, free education, free irrigation, universal health care, support for programs in social enterprise or small and medium enterprise, you will find that the Senate more or less all rallies behind it, including the minority. But when you find laws, policies, or programs which marginalize sectors in our country, kapag meron hong napeperwisyo, nakakawawa, you will find that I will be on the other side. Case in point, train. In the end, there were only 4 of us who voted against the train law, when it was so clear that government wasn't ready to provide support for the 10 million families who would have a more difficult time because of the rise in prices. That's on the record. Inamin ho yan ng Department of Finance, inamin ho yan ng DSWD that they couldn't support our poor countrymen even if the law said they needed to have 200 pesos per month. We ended December of 2018 and hindi pa rin ho nabibigyan yung 10 million families. No? Kulang pa ata ng less than 1 million families. So in that case, where it was clear that there would be marginalized groups, you need to find people who are willing to take a stand and say no. Train 2 is another big issue in the Senate. No? Government is still pushing Train 2. And the business sector, the PEZA locators, the BPOs have all said, if Train 2 passes, you will have thousands of jobs that will leave the country. And somebody has to say, teka lang, yung mga trabahong yan, bawat pamilyang mawawalan ng trabaho, magkakaproblema sila. Somebody needs to take a stand for them. So, I don't think the line in the sand is politics, to be honest. I think the line in the sand is ano yung mga batas at polisiya, what are the laws and policies which can help people, and what are the laws and policies that will marginalize specific sectors. If there are sectors that will be marginalized, that will be in a worse situation because of that law or because of that policy, people need to take a stand. And to be honest, in the past few years, mas marami hong talo kaysa panalo. Mas konti ho kami kaysa panalo. So we hope that in the next elections, more independent-minded senators can actually get to these halls and take a stand for the people.
I have been supportive of the president. I support the president when it comes to his independent foreign policy. I support the president when it comes to his environmental efforts, specifically Boracay and now Manila Bay. But there were issues, and Secretary Roque can attest to this, and this will be declassified years ahead. When I opposed several times, I opposed the Secretary of the Department of Education when she was adamant in insisting that classrooms be utilized only for evacuation centers just for 15 days. Sabi ko, hindi po pwede yan. The Mayon volcano crisis will last for more than 2 months. I opposed that. Pumayag si Presidente. I opposed the Secretary of Agrarian Reform when he insisted that idle military lands be converted into agrarian reform areas. Sabi ko po, hindi po pwedeng gamitin naman basta-basta yung lupa ng ating kasundaluhan at defense establishment. And the President sided with me. I've shown my independence several times, on several occasions. That's why you can expect from me an independent-minded legislator following the Constitution. The Constitution should always be primordial.
Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to follow up on the question of Quintin, and my two questions would really go for the two bets of the administration. You were an appointed official of former President Benigno Aquino. You were the political advisor of President Duterte. Harry, we've known each other for a long time. You represented the Maguindanao massacre victims, particularly the journalists who were killed. And then you both joined the current administration. Let's be more specific about the policies that are in place that you specifically oppose. Do you approve of the ongoing war on drugs?
I do.
Okay, and can you
Because
tell us
no
why?
state in the world will accept drugs as part of society. Any,
How is
in
it
fact,
handled?
all
Do you
states
agree
of
on
the
how it's
world
being handled?
consider drugs as illegal, and they consider it as a valid sovereign function to go after drug dealers
Okay,
and,
and you-
curtail the drug trade. Now, the problem is, as a lawyer, I have used the law actually, to accord victims remedies. Lawyers should be filing cases in case of abuses. That's what lawyers do. We should go beyond politicizing the drug war, using it as a political issue, and provide concrete evidence. Because if there's evidence, I don't think there's anyone in this room that will say that we do not have a working criminal justice system. It's not perfect, but it works. Kian de los Santos proved that when the police used force illegally, they will go to jail. And the president, in fact, articulated that that is his official policy. He will stand by the policemen if the use of force is legal, but he will not defend them if the use of force is illegal. What is wrong with that kind of a policy?
Okay, quickly, Sir Francis, do you want to respond to answer that as well?
I support his answer. I support his answer in the same manner as my conviction that the current trend is correct. A few days ago, I was present when the President relieved the Chief of Police of Bacolod and several other police officers due to their involvement in illegal drugs. Perhaps you would want me to answer the next question, which are in the minds of the audience right now, the current ICC case. Believe you me, the current ICC, that tribunal has lost its credibility. 70 nations are no longer part of the International Criminal Court founded by the Rome Statute. That court, that 70% represents 2/3 of the world's population and 70% of the armed forces of the world. the United States, Russia, China, Israel, they're no longer members of the ICC. If you're referring to a case that is pending right now in the ICC, I think it will not hold legal standing. I'm answering your follow-up question in advance.
Okay. Having said that, though, the update on the Bacolod police chief is that it turns out that he was not on any drugs list at all, but he's already been relieved by the president, accused of his involvement. We'd like to ask Attorney Chel Jokno, you've been very vocal about your opposition. You've represented so many of the victims. What do you make of that as well? Obviously, you are not in favor of the ongoing drug war, but as a response really to your fellow senatorial bench.
Well, I am firmly and fundamentally against the ongoing war on drugs. I would like to clarify, we all agree that drugs are not good for society. We all agree that drugs have to be addressed by the government. The only question is, what is the real and what is the long-lasting solution to the problem? There's no shortcut to stopping criminality except to have a justice system that works. What is wrong with the war on drugs? It is based on a circular issued by then PNP Chief De La Rosa on his first day in office, where he said, from now on, every barangay, together with the police, comes up with a list of so-called drugs, people involved in drugs. But that list is not evidence-based. We know from experience that people's names have gotten on that list who have absolutely nothing at all to do with drugs. The lists have replaced evidence. The lists have replaced cases being filed in court. And historically, the last time we used lists in our country was during the Japanese occupation, when the Japanese government wanted to go after Filipino guerrillas. In the world, we all know the problem with using lists because of what happened in Germany in the time of Hitler, when he used lists in the same way to go after and kill millions of Jews. It's time that we bring back law as we understand it, rather than law coming from the barrels of guns. Because law coming from the barrels of guns is not law at all. And yes, it may be true they are managing to kill a few or maybe more people who are involved on the street level with drugs. But what is happening to the big-time drug lords? What is happening to all that shabu coming into the country, billions of pesos worth? Where is the accountability there? What is happening to those people who allowed all these drugs to come into our country when, in fact, they even seem to be promoted? Is that the kind of accountability that we talk about? And will we ever really address drugs the way this government is attacking it? We will never. This will never be a real solution to the problem.
Would you like that?
Siguro two things, no? And I won't repeat what Attorney Chel has said, who has way more experience working with families than I do. Pero dalawang bagay. Unang-una, 2 years after the 2016 elections, and we will admit the president won on this platform of the war on drugs. I think even his allies will admit that. No? Ito yung pinampanalo niya. But 2 years later, you look at where people are. You look at the surveys. Majority of Filipinos will say fighting drugs is good. Majority. In fact, parang umabot ata ng 80% or 75 or 80%. But the second question was, tama ba yung patayan? And a majority said, hindi tama yung patayan. This is where our people are. That yes, they are against drugs, but no, they are rejecting itong paraan ng pagtugi sa droga na ang gamit to karahasan. That the main tool is violence and fear. Now, my experience as a community organizer, I tried to look at our country. And the way that the war on drugs is being packaged to us, parang yung dating ho, ito lang yung solusyon. The only way to be able to solve drugs is through an enforcement focus. And more or less, yung dating ho sa akin, ay parang yun talaga yung binibigyan ng pansin. It's an enforcement focus. But I'd like to share with you the example of Gawad Kalinga. And I work a lot with Gawad Kalinga. Many of you know GK. GK has over 2,000 communities, and 90% of their communities are drug-free. So when they made that claim, and when we looked further at the communities of GK, we wanted to find out, ano ba yung ginagawa nila? What did they do? What are they doing such that these communities are actually drug-free? That's 90% of 2,000 is 1,800. 1,800 communities, mostly in rural poor or urban poor areas, are drug-free. Ang ginawa ho nila, napakaganda ng samahan ng kapitbahayan. The neighborhood, as a neighborhood watch, they talk amongst each other, they meet regularly, and every time, at the single instance that there is drugs in their area, they come together and as a community, they drive the person out. I asked, meron bang namatay? Meron ba kayong pinatay dito sa 1,800 communities? Wala naman ho. We work together with the officials, with the police, with the barangay tanod and the barangay captain to make sure our communities are safe and drug-free. At ang ginamit ho nila, yung empowerment ng mga tao. Hindi nila ginamit yung mga listahan o mga barilan o mga pagtutukhang. Ginamit ho nila yung kanilang kapitbahayan. Now, what's my point? My point is there are ways to be able to fight drugs na hindi nakabase sa karahasan. There are ways to fight it where you're not only banking on a gun or violence. Enforcement is definitely important, but at the end of the day, even our people are saying, ayaw na namin ng mga patayan yan. We have to look for better ways to be able to solve our drug problem.
Would you like to respond to that?
Crime prevention, for me, should rely also on family-based systems that rely on values that should promote prevention rather than violence. In a community that has suffered from this kind of operations as well, I understand these are in urban communities and mostly poor at that. I know that many of them are from Mindanao. We have to ask Jam, Quintin, why do they do this? And a lot of them are poor. And you know that a lot of the dead are also wearing short pants and sandals. And I do agree that we need to have stronger action. I do disapprove of, however, the deaths. You know, one killing is one killing too many, and I'm sure the widows and the families affected will have a long, bad memory to look back on.
Well, before we get more responses, I guess the question here is since you have an asymmetry in terms of how to approach and to go for recourse, the question is, since the Senate is not just about legislation, it's about inquiry and oversight, would you use that function to actually try to determine in aid of legislation, and what kind of legislation would it be, in terms of how to make it a more holistic approach for ending the war on drugs? Is that a pulpit you would use? Any of you can respond.
Well, for instance, I would ask PNP if it's working with OPAP, Office of the Presidential Advisor in the Peace Process. Is it working with DepEd so that there's more parent-teacher association counseling sessions? How are we addressing the roots why children or people or college students or young people get into drugs? And our communities, how do the local government tanods, the peacekeeping teams, the barangay peace and action teams, how do they instill a community that self-reports itself, self-regulates itself? It reports the drug addict and puts him in rehabilitation. Rehabilitate, do not kill.
Well, I agree that there's been an abuse of legislative inquiries. No? It should strictly be for purposes of legislation. And I think more often than not, the Congress have been arrogating powers that belong to the court, resulting sometimes in fundamental violations of the rights of the accused. However, I'd like to point out that actually the policy of the government on drugs is not limited to police powers. This is the first time we have mega rehab facilities in Nueva Ecija, in Mindanao. This is the first time now that drug users are allowed to enter into plea bargain in exchange for voluntarily entering into these rehab programs. I am not aware of any drug rehab facility built by any other administration of the same scale and scope as built by this administration. What does that show? That shows that this government, although it is firm in using police power in curtailing the malaise and evil of drugs, is also cognizant of the fact that drug users are victims and should be rehabilitated. Let's give credit where it is due. These mega centers attest to the fact that this government, in addition to police power, prioritizes rehabilitation.
Just as a follow-up, Attorney Roque, you think if you want to focus on inquiries in aid of legislation, would you like to do that? And what kind of legislation do you think still needs to be there? Or are you just going to remand to the courts?
Well, so far as I've been in the drug rehab business for 30 years. So I talk with experience. No, I founded a drug therapeutic community for 30 years. And I have to say there's no easy solution to it. We do it through small therapeutic communities with a lot of spiritual guidance. I think all psychologists and psychiatrists recognize that if it's not a religious aspect, it has to be an X factor. They call it in psychiatry now as an X factor. You know? So I think what we need to do is to provide more funding for agencies that can provide X factor, more training for peer leaders, more dissemination even, and of course, making sure that we take steps to get rid of poverty because people primarily resort to drugs because they're poor. And I think the government of President Duterte has been doing a great job as far as poverty is concerned. We have the second fastest growing economy in the world. What more do you want?
May I respond to that question? Yeah, there has to be a legislation that prohibits the use of lists. Because as I said, the lists are not evidence-based. And there should be an inquiry on how these lists are being used. How do you get your name out of it if your name happens to land onto that list? Who has been targeted? How many of those on the list have been killed? What circumstances have they been killed under? All of these things are matters that are very, very relevant to legislation that would ban the use of lists. The use of lists is so damaging to our institutions. For example, early on in this administration, the president came out with a narco list, which included the name of a judge who was dead. But what was the impact of that on our judiciary? Judges began to think, well, if a dead judge, his name can land on this list, then my name could land on this list at any time. Kaya talagang nababahala ang ating mga judge. At sasabihin natin na, do we still have an independent judiciary when you have lists like that could come out at any time and that are not evidence-based? That's why that is so dangerous, and we have to find a way to ban it.
Let's shift to the issue of conflict, the issue of maritime conflict in the South China Sea. When the president was sworn into office during his campaign, he promised an independent or a more independent foreign policy, moving away from long-standing ally, the United States, trying to build closer relations with countries like China and Russia. He has been widely criticized, and the policy is really seen to be, by critics, say, a capitulation to China. How would you do it differently, given that up until recently, and I think recently, even military intelligence reports, official reports sees China and what is happening in the South China Sea the biggest threat for the Philippines in conflict in maritime territories? What can you say about that? Anybody can answer, sir.
Okay. I think the president is doing it correct. Independent foreign policy in terms of our people resulted in the immediate return of the Balanggi Gabels. Kailan pa nangyari yan? Independent foreign policy would mean recognition of Middle East countries returning your OFWs with dignity. Independent foreign policy would mean recognition of a real recognition of the Philippines as a sovereign state. But in terms of the West Philippine Sea, I think we have to look at in the context of the whole UNCLOS law. Article 56 of the Law of the Sea would allow construction of artificial reefs. Hindi po pinag-uusapan to eh. There is a difference between the exclusive economic zone, your fisheries right, and your right to enter into agreement, whether informally or formally with another country in controversy sans the arbitral ruling. So I think what the president is doing is based on political reality. The 9-dash line, we cannot contest that.
No, the 9-dash line has been declared invalid
Yes,
by a
yes.
ruling, right?
Well,
So that actually diminished the claim of China,
The reality-
which the government doesn't want to use.
Yes, the reality here is that we cannot invoke any other right sans without declaring war. I refer, Secretary Roque can validate this. I refer to previous cases before. There was a previous case between Canada versus the USA, which refers to the main Gulf case, which they contested the delineation of a fisheries line. I refer to a case involving Qatar and Bahrain. The same principle. There was an arbitral ruling Pero hindi naman nagkagera nun. Nag-usap lang. I refer again to an existing Antarctica agreement. All nations, Japan, Russia, USA, agreeing to develop that area using environmental laws as the fulcrum of their engagement. So ang sinasabi dito ni Presidente, we're not delaying this. Hindi tayo nakikipag-away. Kung pwedeng pag-usapan yung joint exploration, what's in the seabed, gawin natin kung ano yung mga katulong.
You're in favor of joint exploration.
I am in agreement.
Okay, and how do you know how it will lead in the end? I understand, Harry, you were also involved in the issue of the ICC.
One more item.
Sorry.
I will involve the other ASEAN claimants.
That is the
Vietnam,
main issue,
Brunei
right?
Darussalam, Malaysia, and other countries.
So
It's not just...
You agree in joint maritime exploration, China with ASEAN.
That's why-
you don't agree with
Yes,
bilateral.
That's why I invoked that Antarctica agreement.
But the president prefers a bilateral together with China. Is that correct?
I think eventually the other nations will be involved. Malaysia, perhaps.
Okay, let's move on to Sir Harry or whoever.
Yes,
would like-
I agree with the President's policy. I taught international law for 15 years, and I know a little something about international law. Fact number one, international law is law only because countries consider it to be law. Do we rely on a similar enforcement measure that we have under domestic law and international law? No. The only similar enforcement measure that we have would be Chapter 7, collective enforcement measures under the UN Charter, which has to be authorized by the Security Council. China, as a member of the Security Council, will never vote in favor of that resolution, and the vote of all permanent member nations is required. Fact number two, although there is no enforcement measure in international law, sometimes the very decision of an arbitral tribunal, even if it is not enforceable in the same way as domestic law, is nonetheless the law on the matter, and that's part and parcel of how international law works. I have been critical in the past against China, and I did so because the rights and obligations of the parties in this unresolved territorial dispute has not been ruled upon. What is the difference now? That the UN Tribunal on the Law of the Sea has declared, number one, there is no legal merit on the 9 dash lines. Number two, they have declared that the artificial islands are found in the EEZ and therefore of the Philippines. And therefore, only the Philippines can build on the EEZ. What am I saying? That tribunal has actually ruled on the respective rights of the parties, and it says that China cannot claim it because there's no such thing as the 9 dash lines or historical claims. And number two, we have the sovereign right to build artificial islands on where the islands are. Nothing that China does will ever change it. Why am I supportive of the Duterte administration's policy now? Having said that our rights are clearly defined now, what do? Do we engage China in an armed conflict? Or do we move on with bilateral issues that we can move on, such as investments and tourism? And I think the President was correct. This will never be resolved in our lifetime. Why? Because that tribunal ruled only on maritime issues. Remember that conflict involves islands that generate waters. And for as long as China will not agree on a judicial determination of the dispute on land, and there's no way we can compel China to agree to jurisdiction of the ICJ, then we have to deal with the fact that China is a giant, it's our neighbor, and we might as well be friends without sacrificing our claims, which is already etched in history by that tribunal's decision.
Sir Chell, what he's basically saying is that at this point, either we engage bilaterally with China, is that correct? Or we possibly go to war. Is there no other option?
It's
Is
a
that
binary.
possible?
Well, of course there are. In fact, I am very disappointed with the kind of policy, foreign policy our government has engaged in. We have a ruling in our favor, but if we change our stance and allow China in, we may even lose that ruling because we are waiving our rights under that case. What is the problem here? The problem here really is one of, and I'm not saying that we have to, the problem is one of changing masters. It's true, yes, we used to be subservient to the United States, but it doesn't mean that because we no longer are, that we have to choose another master. We need to find and to stand on our own 2 feet. Now, what is the issue with that case? While it may be true that nothing that China does is going to change that ruling, what we do, what the Philippines does, could affect that ruling. And if we welcome them with open arms, then in effect, we are saying that we ourselves don't recognize that ruling. And that is such a pity because we already won it. And we fought for that so long. And historically, we are backed up. History shows that we own that territory. I don't understand why we are surrendering it.
On that note, while we're discussing questions of law and enforceability, let's add some reality and realpolitik here. So CSIS in its maritime study for the last 6 months has shown a significant increase in 2018 of Chinese fishing vessels, which are estimated around 50 to 100% of that catch goes to China and goes back to Beijing. So the question is, given the oversight function again that you're entitled to as senators, aren't you going to take DFA to task that? Is that something you're going to do once you're elected or re-elected?
On that note, Quintin, no, I've actually filed a resolution to investigate or to look into our dealings with China. Initially, it was just economic. Ano ba yung mga utang na to? What percentages are they? What exactly are these projects? Where are these projects that are supposed to be part of build? How much are we really paying for these projects? Then again, why are we allowing military planes to land in our own country without a proper treaty with that country? We're talking about the Chinese planes that landed in Davao, and these are military planes. Then it became the missiles in these reefs. Because noon, ang sinasabi, anyway, reefs yan for maritime trade yan, tsaka for monitoring. And then we see the clips from the media, we see the aerial clips, and it's clear that these are military bases. This resolution has been left untouched and unheard maybe for the past, 7 months or 8 months, or even more, maybe a year already, more than a year already. And the Senate and many of the senators, both majority and minority, are ready and willing to take this on. Babalik tayo sa konstitusyon, no? And I will defer to my two lawyer friends here, or three lawyer friends, or two lawyer friends? Two lawyer friends, three lawyer friends here. There's a provision in the Constitution that says that, although it was referring to America, there is a provision there that says any foreign military in our own country needs a treaty, needs a Senate approval. And as far as I know, wala naman tayong treaty with China, and yet their military is already being allowed in our territory. Whether that's referring to Davao, the landing in Davao, or even these artificial reefs in our EEZ. No. I think the Senate does have an important role to play. If, again, the majority were able to open up many resolutions on many different topics, siguro naman pwede to tingnan rin. At talagang mapakita natin sa tao, ano ba talaga itong deals natin? No? One thing that was very clear to me is that there shouldn't be any secret deals with China. No secret deals in terms of allowing the military to come here, in terms of our economic dealings with them, in terms of workers coming here and taking on Filipino jobs. Kailangan malinaw yan. And again, the independent foreign policy seems more like a dependent foreign policy being dependent on China.
Candidates, before we turn it over to the audience, because I know you're chomping at the bit to ask a few questions. So would you like to add or rebut?
Well, you see, the reality is, and I have sued before the Supreme Court to question foreign policy issues, is that the President remains the architect of foreign policy. Is congressional or Senate laws required? Yes, because as I said, the issue at hand is an issue involving land and maritime disputes which have not been resolved by the UN Tribunal on the Law of the Sea. The Senate must pass laws to strengthen our claim, and I filed one such bill in the House, which is the creation of a Kalayaan Island Development Authority, because it is through the exercise of legislative jurisdiction that we strengthen our claim. And we should also file cases, no? So because judicial jurisdiction is recognized under international law as amongst the strongest exercise of jurisdiction, and this is in preparation to a tribunal eventually ruling on who's got a better title to the disputed islands and maritime disputes. Now, again, I underscore the fact. In the past, we already tried the use of force. What happened? That's how we lost Scarborough Shoal. When we sent our one and only Navy boat to drive away the Chinese in Scarborough, what happened? We were permanently banned in Scarborough. Criticize the President for his foreign policy. The truth of the matter is that the Filipino fishermen now are able to fish again in Scarborough, when in the past they were not able to do so.
All right. At this point, there's more to talk about in terms of getting discourse on other parts, the economy, social welfare, human security. I know, Samir, you want to talk about that, but let's have the audience, the collective wisdom of the audience, come out now. There are microphones around the room. Feel free to, introduce yourself and your question. you can direct it to anyone or all the.
Good evening. I'm Gemma Cruz Araneta. A while ago, Attorney Tolentino mentioned that the Constitution is primordial. Which Constitution do you mean? Isn't it being changed right now in Congress? And isn't there a draft of a federal constitution without the anti-dynasty law, with no term limits, and changing the succession of the president? So, sir, which constitution do you mean?
I'm referring to the present 1987 Constitution. We're talking about the oversight functions of the Senate. It's part of the Constitution. Attorney Roque referred to a while ago of the role of the president being the chief architect of foreign policy. That's the 1987 Constitution. We're talking about the justice system under the 1987 Constitution. So we're not referring to proposals to amend the Constitution. We're not referring to current initiatives to push through a federal form of government. We're referring to our current Constitution, ma'am.
But sir, didn't the Congress already approve that federal form, and they're now waiting for the Senate to approve or disapprove it? So my question is, if it gets to the Senate, are you, senators, going to approve it? What will you do?
I have yet to read the approved version of the lower house. Through anecdotal news reports, it seems that they have amended the proposal coming from the CONCOM. So I'm not familiar with the House version, so I cannot reply intelligently. But if it's the version of the CONCOM, I think I would have to give my imprimatur. First, because I am in favor of a shift to the federal. Let me give you just a minute of a concrete example on how this works. I have been immersed in several disasters years ago. Alam niyo po yun. When you talk about Mimaropa, if a typhoon or a calamity occurs in Mimaropa, Calapan or Mindoro or Romblon, the mayor of Calapan will have to go to DPWH Region 4B, which is located in front of Channel 7 in EDSA. If the mayor of Calapan will have to request for medicines from Region 4B, the DOH, he will have to go to Region 4B, DOH, Project 4 Quezon City. If he will have to secure sardines and bags of rice from DSWD, he will have to go to Mimaropa DSWD right in front of Manila Paco Park. Ganun po yung sitwasyon ngayon. So to empower the local government, but this is another story, I'll take more time. I think that previous version, which will need refinements coming from the Senate, is better. But I have to admit, I have yet to read the version coming from the House, which has been adulterated is not the proper term, revised. But I agree there has to be I agree that we're referring to the present Constitution when I say primordial.
Maybe adulterated is the proper term, no? The one that came out of Congress. Kahit to yung CONCOM, the CONCOM commissioners even washed their hands off of that version that came out of Congress because it primarily took out the anti-political dynasty clause, which many of the CONCOM delegates and commissioners said was fundamental to that change in constitution. Just to give you an update, it's dead. It's practically dead. The Senate has about 3 to 4 weeks left. We're still tackling the budget. We'll finish the budget in about a week and a half, if we're lucky. Hindi ho natapos yung DPWH deliberations today. It will continue tomorrow. So that's another day. After the budget, you have very short time left to tackle anything substantial. So I doubt, in fact, impossible that that the constitutional changes that came out of Congress will be approved by the Senate anytime soon. So in short, for the 17th Congress, for those of you here who are worried about any chacha, malabo na ho yan. It's really not going to happen. Now the question is, what about in the 18th Congress? The composition of the Senate will change. The composition of the House will also change. And that's one of the main political battlefield, because those who are in favor of a charter change will organize around it, and those who are against a charter change will also organize around it. And I think this is one of those issues where there's a clear line in the sand. No? Pagdating ho sa social services kasi, to be fair, nagkakasundo po yung marami sa amin pagdating sa social services. Pero pagdating sa mga bagay na ganito, malinaw kung nasaan yung mga tao. Now, I attended a number of the hearings in the Senate regarding the CONCOM draft. My main issue with it is this. When you ask the commissioners, ano ba yung reason kung bakit nila tinutulak yung bagong charter? Many of them, to be fair, I love their answer. Many of them pointed to improvements in the economy. Better equality, access to services, more jobs, mostly all economic in nature. Pero kung basahin niyo po yung CONCOM draft, maybe 80% of it is political in nature. And if you were to look at it from a very objective point of view, yung gusto mo economic pero yung solusyon mo political. I don't think that those changes, which roughly center around changes in structures and changes in the coverage of politicians' responsibilities and accountabilities, I don't think, even if you change that, it will necessarily mean a better economy. In fact, even the economic managers themselves gave a few comments regarding that draft and said that if that were passed tomorrow, it would be disastrous for our economy. So ako po, that draft charter, I'm not in favor of it. Mas hindi po ako in favor dun sa lumabas sa Kongreso. And if indeed we do want to improve our economic standing, fight poverty, then let's look at real, concrete solutions to this. Hindi yung sinasabi mo para to sa mahihirap pero yung binago mo naman yung coverage ng mga politiko.
Quintin? The BOL is supposedly a template for federal, the Bangsamoro Organic Law, but I would look at the BOL as a unique sui generis, as they would say, the lawyers. It's a unique case in itself. It is the location of the poorest of the poor. It has had a unique cultural, social context. Bangsamoro is not the template for federalism. Yes, you've devolved more powers, you've transferred more powers, you've addressed many key provisions that are necessary for more self-determination. The BOL is unique in itself. So the Bangsamoro Organic Law in the next Congress should be checked. If it would be that template, BOL for me is a unique case in itself. It should stand on its own as a unique example of trying to address this conflict-ridden area. And we need to check in the next Congress how it's gonna fare. So I would urge the next Congress look into it.
What I'm in favor of is local autonomy. As a practitioner, I filed 2 test cases in the Supreme Court. One I won, one I lost. The first one was the Dodo Mandana case. We successfully argued that the correct interpretation of the 40% for IRA should include all taxes, not just internal revenue taxes. We lost another one, purportedly, and that is to implement the provision of the local government code that LGUs should share 40% gross of all revenues coming from natural wealth. Now, this convinced me, really, that there's a need for federalism. Because unless there is a change in the fundamental charter itself, the congressmen and the senators will not allow the system to change. Why? I was there. Lahat po sila kumikita dyan. May porsyento sa kada proyekto, kaya hindi nila pababayaan yung national budget na maalis sa Kongreso. Kaya nga, this changed my position na baka kailangan talaga ng charter change. Pero ako, simple lang po ang formula ko para mabilis at ma-implement. Unang-una, baguhin natin yung provision on IRA. Dapat at least 50-50. Pangalawa, yung share ng LGU sa natural wealth. Kita nyo nga sa Palawan hanggang ngayon, hindi pa naibibigay. And yet, ironically, they provide 40% of power to Luzon and they have 8-hour brownouts in Palawan. Is that right? So I want that change also to 50-50 also. No? And number 3, the power to tax, which does not need consent of Congress because now local taxation is always subject to congressional approval. Sa akin po, hindi man mangyayari yung federalism because the political elite also don't want it. ayaw nila na mayroong pang mas mataas kesa sa governors. At saka yung pagdating nga po ng issue ng budget, hindi po papayag yan dahil mababawasan ang kita nila. So let's go for what is doable, amending provisions of the local government, providing for local autonomy. Party list po ako, hindi ako nag-control ng district engineer, kaya wala po akong kinita dyan. My conscience is clear.
Attorney Chang?
Federalism, as proposed by the lower house, is just going to institutionalize political dynasties. It's not going to do anything else, and it will never address the real problems of our country. In fact, to me, it's a diversion. We need to look in the face the problems that we are confronted with and address them. The more we talk about federalism and charter change, the farther away we will be from addressing the real problems of the country. Food, problems of jobs, problems of justice, and problems of freedom.
At any rate, maybe Boot, given the shrinking window that
Hi.
Senator Bam was talking about.
Excuse
So-
me, quick question for Mr. Roque. How exactly would you implement or execute federalism?
Well, I'm saying
What,
it's
what,
not
what would be the
doable.
mechanism and what would be the process that we would have to basically get into to realize that?
I think you didn't get my point. I'm saying it's not going to happen because even the political elite is opposed to it. That's why, for me, and there's a need to change the system. Look, 40 billion was unspent by the DOH on health facilities. These are 2 million barangay health centers that will have to be built by DPWH when the municipalities and cities can build them for themselves. The classrooms of DPWH, they cost anywhere from 5 to 100 million. Local government units have the power to build that. Why do congressmen object to local government units? Because they want to make money from these projects. That's why I'm convinced constitutional change, changing the provision on IRA and on sharing of revenues arising from wealth is necessary because it's money for the congressmen and the senators. Don't think there's no pork barrel for the senators. They have bigger. They have billions. While the congressmen are limited to 1 billion per district, the senators go as high as 5 to 10 billion.
Senator Bam, would you
Okay?
like to respond?
So,
I think Harry's
So I
referring
hear-
to his allies in the administration when he talks about
Well-
1 billion per district.
So anyway, that's what I saw in the 16 months that I was in Congress, no? So bahala sila, no? But the point is, yun nga po, federalism will not happen. That's why I'm opting for institutionalizing the strengthening of local autonomy to raise funds and to determine how to spend public coffers.
May I just respond though, because Harry was referring to the Senate. I know he does a wide swath, but I know he's referring to yung malalakas. Ganoon naman ho yun eh. Yung malalakas get billions of pork barrel, and that's currently the problem now. The problem we're seeing now between Majority Floor Leader Andaya and not this Jokno, but the other Jokno, is largely about pork barrel. Sa totoo lang, pork barrel, insertions, however you want to call it. Now, ito ho yung tanong. Okay. Napakarami na nga. Si Harry na mismo umamin at nagsabi na billion-billion yung napupunta po dito sa mga proyektong ito. Pangalawa, he also mentioned yung underspending. Billion-billion din po yan. DepEd underspent 50 billion just this year, just last year, no? So we're talking about billions of pesos which are either not spent or spent through projects which are just the pet projects of these legislators. And yet we raise taxes? Hindi ho ba yun yung pinaka-masaklap sa lahat ng yun? In a year that we raise taxes, it's quite obvious that ang raming perang pwedeng ginamit para sa ibang mga bagay. No? And again, I agree with Harry. I love to say it, Harry. I agree with you with regard to local autonomy. Totoo ho yan, no? What he said, which is basically what we all want, which is for services to get closer to the people, kahit po si Secretary Francis, nabanggit niya yan, it can be done with changes in the law. It can be done with following the Supreme Court decision on the Mandanas case. I almost, Secretary Harry, I didn't even know that was your case. But many of us have said we need to implement that case. But it's also the administration who refuses to implement that case. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, secretaries, it was DBM who said if that case will be implemented, they will declare a deficit. Meaning ayaw talaga nilang i-implement yung Mandanas case. But even with just implementing that Mandanas case and giving more money to our LGUs, allowing them more responsibility and powers, we will be able to solve huge problems and also solve what I think is the main reason why a number of our fellow Filipinos want a federal form, which is to be able to get these services closer to people. Now, pag binukos niyo po yung charter, it's like Pandora's box. The CONCOM said, we will not allow a federal charter that does not have an anti-political dynasty clause. Well, Congress just passed one. So, Pandora's box po yan. And marami sa mga safeguards, ang daling sabihin, magagawa yan, pero pag panahon na botohan na and it's already in the hands of the congressmen and the senators, we don't really know what's going to happen. So I would subscribe to Secretary Roque's position that we pass bills on local autonomy and set aside the federal charter for another time.
Let me disagree with Secretary Roque. I've stated my case citing examples of Mimaropa. My experience as Metro Manila chairman, which is akin to the Metro Manila governor before, or the governor of Jakarta, is that we really need a separate entity here for Metro Manila. Just like your Putrajaya, just like your Brasilia in Brazil, just like your Ottawa-Carleton region in Canada, hindi po pwedeng local autonomy lang. Hindi mo pwedeng empower lang si Quezon City, si Pasay, si Nabota, si Malabon, si Caloocan. There has to be a form of government, na-mention yung word akin, that would really solve the problems of a big metropolitan area with a 16 million daytime population. Hindi kaya yung existing system. That's why I'm batting for this. Siguro pwedeng selective. We will have a trial balloon January 21, yung sa BOL. May plebiscito na. Sinabi yung word kanina, Zui Ineris, but it has to be started. We'll have a metropolitan Cebu later on, 8 years from now. Ganon din yung problema ang harapin natin, urbanization. And the only way to solve that is to have a government that would be really in place, that will be separate from the central government, separate from your micro-local government, in charge. Similar to your Putrajaya. I'm not referring to the political dynasties. I'm not referring to the other regions. Pero yung urban areas natin, massive yung paglago ng ating populasyon. Kailangan natin i-address to. And that's one reason why I advocate federalism.
So I guess about managing discretion, since Senator Babi mentioned that there's a shrinking window to do this, and speaking of which, we have room for 2 more questions. Please, ladies and gentlemen, feel free to ask your last 2 questions before we wrap up.
Hi, my name is Penny. I just like to bring in the concept of sustainability and how it actually, whether it does resonate in the government, and this can go in many different levels, right? So when you make your policies on the drug war, for instance, when I talk about sustainability, our current median age is what, like 24, 23, even younger. So we are breeding this generation of millions of people who are slowly becoming just more accustomed to the fact that we're killing a lot of people without jurisdiction. So that's one angle you can go with it. Another one is when we accept Chinese investors for a lot of our infrastructures, what does that mean for the future? So because as a voter and as a Filipino citizen, personally, I don't see a lot of continuity between the governments. So I'm just genuinely curious whether sustainability and continuity is part of the conversation as part of the government, because we do have this very young median age, and it's a huge question. Yeah. So if you can feel free to just...
Let me correct you that there's no sustainability. As far as corruption on the pork barrel is concerned, all administrations are guilty. Some are even more guilty because in addition to pork barrel, they had DAP. That's the problem. Pero yan po sinasabi ko ngayon sa inyong lahat. Institutionalize po ang korupsyon. Kaya itong eleksyon na ito, kalimutan niyo pong mga ibang issue, ibalik niyo sa kanila yung kinukurakit niyo, magkano kinuha mo doon sa mga proyekto mo dahil meron kang kontraktor na kumukuha doon sa mga proyekto mo. Hindi po totoo na ang korupsyon doon lamang sa PDAF. Lahat po ng mga proyekto, kada distrito, merong kita mga congressman at mas malaki ang mga senador. So tanungin niyo po sila, magkano kinuha mo doon sa korupsyon? Institutionalize po yan. Yan, mali ka. There is sustainability as far as systemic corruption is concerned. Now alam niyo why I'm running. Ibubulgar ko silang lahat.
May I add? Yeah, may I add?
Penny.
Penny, Sustainability of programming can be addressed also by the Senate checking on how we do implement sustainability, and the National Economic Development Authority, I feel, is one key actor in trying to weave together everybody in the same direction, or in a direction that what is important for policy is to address what's really needed by our country, and is NEDA really doing its job? So for me, yes, it's very valuable that you raised sustainability. I would want that. And the Senate should be the one to call this out.
I agree with you that sustainability should be raised. But if you look at previous administrations, and if you foresee future generations, they will all rely on current state policies enshrined in the Constitution, the well-being of the Filipino, the rule of law, the environment. So when you refer to the war on drugs, the next administration, I am 100% sure, will also focus on law enforcement, peace and order, in whatever manner, whatever hubris. The next administration will focus on foreign direct investment. The next administration would focus on close ties with our allies, ASEAN neighbors, and even China. So hindi siguro mababago yan eh. Mababago lang yung uri, yung pangalan, pero yung sustainability nun, yung pagpapatuloy nun, nandun pa rin po yun.
We need sustainability not just for our environment, but for governance itself. And the biggest thing that we lack as far as sustainability is concerned is sustainability in accountability. And that is the one thing that I think we have no choice but to address that. We need, what is the one thing that is stopping us? It is the lack of accountability.
Penny, thank you for your question. If you look at the main programs of the previous administration, largely they've been continued. In fact, you could even say that they've been continued and enhanced because the budgets have grown bigger. What were the three big programs of the previous administration? PhilHealth, K-12, 4Ps. These were all largely smaller programs in the previous administration. In the last administration, naging gabilyones yung mga funding nito. Until today, the 4Ps continues. And in fact, a number of us are trying to get it enshrined into a law na maging patas na talaga siya. So 4Ps is there, the social welfare side. PhilHealth, which of course was also greatly expanded in the previous administration, is being expanded even more now, to be frank. And then K-12, which was also a big education reform, that's also being continued now, and now we have the free college as well. So when it comes to certain aspects, there is that level of continuity, and we have some secretaries and even the bureaucracy to thank for that. The biggest changes, I think, are really three. One is the war on drugs, peace and order. The focus on peace and order now is really, I think, the cornerstone of this administration. And many of us have taken an opposite position in the way that it's being done or the way that it's being implemented. Second is taxation. And if you look at Train 1, Train 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, some of us, again, have taken a position where mas nakakalala to, and some have said that this is what we need for our economy. And third is our independent, in quotation marks for me, policy on China. The pivot away from America, the pivot to China, which includes the economic deals with them, which includes the workers, which includes our position in the West Philippine Sea. So, again, we go back. There are, and federalism is the fourth probably, where this administration has chosen to really push federalism, while in the past, charter changes were not really the priority. So, if you look at these four, I think you can more or less judge us already based on the differences on these four issues. When it comes to the other issues, there's a lot of agreement. To be honest, there's a lot of agreement. And kailangan naman yun, no? We have to agree because, our countrymen need the help. They need the support. We can't disagree on everything. There will be agreements on a lot of these basic issues which are important for our people. And there will be disagreements where some of us feel that the country is not headed in the right direction with these issues. Now, ano lagi yung challenge, no? And this is something I also experienced, especially during the budget. There are issues which you have to look at the long term, and there are issues which you have to look at the short term. A lot of our countrymen, ang needs sila are right now. Their needs are right now. Ang pangangailangan nila na kumain, magkatrabaho, magkaroon ng tulong sa medical, that's very urgent for them. And we have to find a way to support that. But at the same time, we need to look at the future and say, yung mga anak, yes, makapag-aral nga, pero kailangan may trabaho rin na available kapag nakapagtapos. No? And you have to balance all of that. And it's not either or. You don't have to trade off the now for the future or the future for the now. A good Senate, an independent Senate, a Senate that uses its brain and is close to the people and will always have the people at its heart, will be able to find balance. And I think that's something that hopefully our voters will look for also in the next elections.
Well, unfortunately, I think we're down to our last question from the audience. May.
And talagang wow, every movie that I watched, you were there. And because other candidates don't have access to as much money, or because maybe you were MMDA before, and you were there. In fact, you're not MMDA anymore. So I'd like to ask, where did you get your money to spend on those ads? Whose money were used? And will you be open to tell us the money that you have already spent running for senator to a certain entity, so that your money, the money that you use, can be monitored?
Of course, I have worked with you before when we were planning to upgrade the indie film sector. So
And it's so sad, because watching the MMFF right now, it's really so sad.
You will agree with me that my passion is still with the movie industry. I was the one who, modesty aside, initiated the Cell Phone Film Festival. I was the one who revived the indie films segment. I was the one who proposed a micro-international Metro Manila Film Festival, and a lot of other things. So ito ngayon, ang nag-produce nito yung mga kaibigan ko na lang. So I had an agreement with Chairman Danny Lim. Sabi ko, since ako naman yung talagang nagsulong nitong mga short films, pwede ba unahan na natin ngayon para maingganyo yung mga nanonood? Kasi padating na yung Aquaman, padating na yung napakaraming Hollywood films. Baka matabunan ito kasi kahit yun lang 8 ang palabas, yung nangyari noong 2017, nakakalungkot. When I was chairman of the Metro Manila Film Festival, modesty aside, mahigit 1 billion yung revenues. But during the last year, bumagsak yun. I don't know for what reason, baka yung quality ng films. Sabi ko, tutulong ako sa inyo. But I don't know the revenue. So, ako lang po yun. Pero sa mga ads ngayon, wala pa akong ads. You take a look at the TV stations, wala naman ako lumalabas na ads ngayon, political ads. Ever since. I don't know if you monitored anything. So, modesty aside, honestly and truthfully, kami lang po yung gumawa nun. Caricature lang po yun eh. Hindi nga doon lumabas yung mukha ni Vice Ganda, pero wala yung actual na katawan niya. Tulong ko lang po yun sa movie industry. Pero honestly, siguro naiisip ko na rin yung political effects noon, para nangampanya na rin ako, pero tulong ko lang po yun.
Tulong niyo kanino?
Sa movie industry. Na
Wow,
matagal ko nang... nakausap na kita dati. Yung mga nabanggit ko ngayon. So, no sarcasm here. So, sana maintindihan mo yun.
Hindi, ang tanong ko nga is, so ang sinasabi ninyo, hindi kayo nag-spend for making the ads of the MMFF. It was MMFF who spent.
No, hindi po. Walang ginastos ang MMFF. Walang ginastos ang MMDA. May mga kaibigan lang kami na nag-contribute. Kasama na rin po ako sa gumastos doon. Siguro mga 250 to 300,000.
Okay. Pero I think you really benefited the most. More than nakatulong kayo, I think you benefited the most because if you look at the movies in the 2018, they're the worst. The worst.
I was not part of the...
Yeah, but you promoted.
Yes, but I was
you promoted and you were part of the screening committee, right?
No, I was not part. Although...
Well, because in the supers...
I've heard good reviews for Aurora. Kay Ann
Have you seen
Curtis.
it? Have you seen any of the movies?
Hindi ko po napanood.
Ayun. So you endorsed movies you have not seen and they were...
No, I have read the script nung iba.
Which one?
Yung Aurora. Tapos siguro yung nabawasan na yung no offense, hindi naman tayo naka-record, nabawasan na yung shake, rattle, and roll.
Wala nang shake, rattle.
Nabawasan na yun. Pero ang namimiss ko ngayon yung Cellphone Film Festival, which I initiated. Nakatatlong taon ako noon. Using a cell phone, all students all over the Philippines can submit entries concerning a relevant social issue.
May I have another question, you
Yeah, I
said?
have another question to Sir Harry. Sir Harry, ang sakit ho sa dibdib pakinggan na pag sinasabi ninyong yung mga congressman, kumikita yan, yung mga senador, mas malaki pa ang kinita ng mga yan. Ang sakit, na parang, the way you say it, serving in government, and you tell us that there's so much corruption and that you will run for the Senate at ibubulgarin mo sila. You were in Congress. Did you ever do anything to make bulgar any kind of corruption? Because, I remember watching the fishermen, yung mga umakyat sa barko, tapos kinukuha yung kanilang isda. Napanood kita nun eh. Alam mo, nanggigigil ako sa galit, naiyak ako para dun sa mga mangingisda. Because I truly felt for them. And what I watched then was they were telling you their story, but you were manipulating their story to make it feel like you were doing your job. I did not feel that when I was watching you. So now that you will run for the Senate and you are telling us that you will expose corruption, you did not do that when you were serving in government. Did you really expose people in Congress who were corrupt?
Well, May, I served only in Congress for 16 months. I had to learn the ropes. Gaya mo, ang alam ko na pork barrel was only PDAF because we went to court to have it invalidated. Hindi ko akalain lahat ng porsyento, lahat ng proyekto, may kinikita ang mga taong gobyerno. At hindi lang po yan sa legislatura. Pati yung executive, siyempre, meron din. So I had to learn my ropes, and I'm speaking now. That's why I'm running. Everywhere I go, I will repeat this. Because yan ang dapat malaman ng taong bayan. Let me correct you. Ako po nagsampa ng kaso para dun sa mga mangingisda laban sa China. So hindi po nagbabago ang aking posisyon. Hindi ko po sinabi na umakyat sila at kinuha isda, tama yun. Ang sinasabi ko lang is, number one ngayon, meron na nga pong desisyon na ang Pilipinas ay merong karapatan mangisda dyan sa Scarborough Shoal. So nasettle na po yan. So ngayon, ang issue is, anong gagawin natin sa relasyon between the China and the Philippines? Tayo ba'y makikipag-away despite the fact na alam na natin kung anong posisyon natin? Or should we move on and become good neighbors where we can? Of course, we will never agree on the disputed territory. Unfortunately, I don't see that being resolved in our lifetime. And that is what I meant by supporting the initiatives to move on matters that we can move on and to stand by our territorial claims.
You can close with that as well.
Salamat sa tanong. Parang softball question yun for me, no? As many of you know, I've worked with many of you in different fora already. Yung micro, small, and medium enterprises po, malapit na malapit sa puso ko. My first law in the Senate was the Go Negosyo Act, which supported the creation of negosyo centers all over the Philippines. To date, there are 1,000 negosyo centers in all the cities, all the provinces, most of the first and second class municipalities. Meron na po yan. What do? They provide support for our MSMEs. They provide access to financing, access to market, and of course, mentorship. These are the three things that we need, no? If you're a micro or small enterprise, you need financing. Kailangan mo ng money, the first M. You need to be able to get a financing partner na bagay sa negosyo mo. You can't have a financing partner with rates which are extremely high. You need to have a financing partner that can match the level of production that you have. Second is mentorship. A lot of our countrymen who get into micro and small enterprise don't have the basics. They don't have financial literacy. They're not able to handle production properly or even marketing. So they need a lot of training. And education here is quite important. And of course, the last one is market. And this is the most important one. To be fair, our DTI has been focusing on this for the past 3 years already, and they've been doing a very good job in terms of promoting money market and mentorship. Yung market to, pinakamahalaga. Bakit? Because many of our countrymen have really good products, but they will only be able to sell in their own vicinity. Hindi yan lalabas sa kanilang barangay, hindi lalabas sa kanilang munisipyo o syudad. They need to be able to find ways for their products to get improved, upgraded, and eventually find larger markets. Now, the next level or the next step, and I'm sure the DTI is also focusing on this, is really the inclusive supply chain. This is something I've been working on from the time I was in social enterprise till my first few years in the Senate until now. Ano po yun? The businesses that you enjoy, the businesses that you have, how many of them are really buying from our micro, small, and medium enterprises? You know, just this week, if I'm not mistaken, Jakarta made like an ordinance for them, no, where their resorts need to buy a certain amount from farmers, from their local farmers. They need to buy a certain amount, I think 30% of all of their supply from the localities where they come from. Yan yung mga polisiya na kailangan ho natin. We need to be able to get our informal sector linked up to our formal sector. We need to be able to make sure this wealth that we have right now get to more places in our country. Now, sabi kaya ni Secretary Harry, we have the second best economy in the world. No? Ang alam ko, it's in fastest growing. That's true. For the past 5 or 6 years, totoo po yan. Sometimes we even outpace China. There are quarters where we outpace China. But if you look at our poverty incidence, it's roughly the same. Nasa 20 to 25%. Hindi po talaga siya bumababa. Well, what does it mean? It means our country is growing, but our inequality is also growing. And supporting our MSMEs, providing education, providing support for their micro businesses, letting them join formal supply chains, that's distributive in nature. That will share the wealth in our country. And how I wish, yun na lang sana yung main focus ng ating gobyerno. And maybe with the right people, we can focus on this and really put a dent in poverty in our country. Thank you.
I think this is a parting shot.
All right. One of the things that we need is to level the playing field. How do we do that for small and medium enterprises? I think they have a big problem when it comes to corruption. They have a big problem dealing with all the registration requirements and such that are imposed by the government. That is also where the justice system can come into play. The other issue is one of when you're a big business and you get involved in a dispute, a case is not a problem. But if you're a small or medium entrepreneur and you get involved in a case, that can affect your entire operations and it can even result in your closure. So I go back to my proposal that we remove from the courts our commercial issues and disputes and we bring them into arbitration, as we have successfully done in the construction industry. These are two concrete measures that have to be addressed if we want to level the playing field as well as empower our small and medium entrepreneurs. If this is our parting shot, may I just end with one thing? Ako po yung nababahala sa ating pamahalaan sa paulit-ulit na pangangatwiran nila. Parati nilang sinasabi na joke lang naman yon, joke yan, ganyan. For us in the opposition, I want to assure everybody that we're not a joke. And as far as I am personally concerned, since it's my name, I will never tolerate those kinds of jokes in the Senate. Thank you.
Kagaya po nung sinasabi kanina, kailangan talagang tulungan natin yung mga ngayon pa lang mamumuhunan. Sa nasa isip ko ngayon, yung mga pabalik na OFW, bigyan natin ng 3 taon na tax-free, 3 years tax-free break. Bigyan natin na mas marami silang ayuda na manggagaling sa iba't ibang bangko, yung mga OFW natin. Tulungan natin ang estudyante uli natin na mag-aral ng farming. Ang baba na ng enrollment sa UP Los Baños. Wala nang gusto mag-aral ng farming. Ang problema natin bigas. Ibalik natin yung concept ng corporate farming. Ang lalaki ng mga korporasyon natin. Tumulong sila na magtanim din, mag-engage sa agriculture. Bigyan na lang ng tax incentives yan. At pang-apat siguro, yung binabanggit ko kaninang Philippine Urban Development Commission, maging bahagi ito ng National Land Use Act. Bawalan natin yung malakihang conversion ng agricultural lands into subdivisions. Hayaan natin na magkaroon pa tayo ng pagkukunan ng pagkain. Kahit mapasa itong rice tarification bill, dapat meron pa talaga tayong pagkukunan ng pagkain dito para maging isang ganap na negosyante ang isang Pilipino. Bigyan natin ng kapital. Kung sa papanong paraan, ang sinasabi ni Bam kanina, bigyan pa natin ng napakaraming ayuda. Yung break, yung incentives, yung tamang edukasyon, at marami pa sigurong iba. Maraming salamat po.
A dean of a college of governance describes our poverty as draconian. 61 pesos a day for a Filipino is appalling and continues to shock me, especially from war zone areas. And for me, making or easing business, Canteen, is that the word, easing the doing of business, is very, very personal. We need to access credit and loan, especially for the poorest and the women. When you empower women with financing, with credit, with loan, you empower a whole family because you feed the whole family, and it's tested in the Grameen banking of Bangladesh. So it's, for me, important that the policy environment facilitates that, for credit and loan to be accessed, financing to be accessed, and I'd close with the words, books, not bullets, money, not more violence. We need tractors, not tanks. We need teachers, not more terror. Good evening.
Well, again, I can only speak from experience. No? I've been involved in development work for 30 years, specifically in microfinance. And what has made the difference in our experience is not only the provision for capital, but the support that we give to our clients on a daily basis. Government must undertake similar activities. No, it's not enough that you give them funding. It's not enough that you give them general advice. You must be there on a daily basis. Perhaps that's something that the DTI should look into. But I'd like to make one specific comment on justice. Totoo po yan. Talaga namang sa lahat ng measurements on development, we have to look at the administration of justice. Our problem is we have a weird judicial system. When the Americans came, they wanted to bring in the jury trial system and brought in what is known as a litigious system, no? Where the judge receives evidence. But you see, we did not adopt the American system because we did not adopt a jury trial system. Under a jury trial system, once it starts, it has to end. Now, we used to have what is known as inquisitorial. Inquisitorial did not leave the task of gathering evidence to the lawyers. It was the prosecuting judge himself who got the evidence. So what you do is you appear in court, you agree on issues, and the judge will require the counsels to present the evidence that he requires in order that he can come up with a decision. I think we need to move back to that kind of a system for the judicial system to work. Now, I hope that we could actually have more discussions like this. I'd like to thank the organizers, Manila Club, for this opportunity, and I welcome further discussions as what we just had today. And thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. We hope to have you all again. And Jam, would you like to say something?
We'd just like to thank everyone, our candidates, for being here. We do appreciate meetings like this, smaller forums, because it really allows candidates to speak and talk about issues. And with audience coming in, asking direct questions, you do see exactly where they will and do stand. I think this coming elections is critical because as we see the president, the current government is almost halfway through its term, and things may change. The plebiscite, January 21, in the Southern Philippines could also pave the way for changes in the Southern Philippines. And now we need to take stock of where we stand as a country and towards the future. Those who are here are members of the business community, academe, those working in government. It's important that we also remember those who are in the fringes. We look forward to many conversations like this one. Thank you for Manila House. My name is Jamela Alindogan of Al Jazeera.
Thank you very much. My name is Quintin Pastrana. Thank you for the discourse.
Well, thank you again to everyone. Thank you for being here with us. I'd like to thank the candidates for coming over and being very candid. I appreciate that. And I'd like to say something on a personal note. I was away for 30 years, so I've only been back, 4 years now. I've never voted in my life, which is a little bit of an embarrassment. But I will vote, I hope, if I get to register this particular elections. And as we've seen in the US with the latest midterm elections, elections have consequences. And I think this one, as Jam was saying, is going to be quite a consequential election cycle. So everyone vote, starting with myself. Thank you so much for being here.
All the best. Thank you very much.